Abraham's obedience tested. Later on, God tested Abraham's faith and obedience. "Abraham," God called. "Yes," he replied, "here I am." "Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will point out to you." The next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood to build a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place where God had told him to go. On the 3rd day of the journey, Abraham saw the place in the distance. "Stay here with the donkey," Abraham told the young men. "The boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will come right back." Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders, while he himself carried the knife and the fire. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac said, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "We have the wood and the fire," said the boy, "but where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" "God will provide a lamb, my son," Abraham answered, and they both went on together. When they arrived at the place where God had told Abraham to go, he built an altar and placed the wood on it. Then he tied Isaac up and laid him on the altar over the wood. And Abraham took the knife and lifted it up to kill his son as a sacrifice to the Lord. At that moment, the angel of the Lord shouted to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Yes," he answered, "I'm listening." "Lay down the knife," the angel said. "Do not hurt the boy in any way, for now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld even your beloved son from me." Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horns in a bush. So he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering on the altar in place of his son. Abraham named the place, "The Lord will provide." This name has now become a proverb. On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. Then the angel of the Lord called again to Abraham from heaven. "This is what the Lord says. Because you have obeyed me and have not withheld even your beloved son, I swear by my own self that I will bless you richly. I will multiply your descendants into countless millions, like the stars of the sky and the sand on the seashore. They will conquer their enemies, and through your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, all because you have obeyed me."
Thanks, Bill. I think yesterday afternoon I was expressing some of my frustration there with my family in the room about how much work I had yet to do on my message. And Annika said, "Well, Dad, why don't you just preach a shorter sermon?" Oh, what a novel idea. Have you guys ever thought of that before? I said, "You're silly. You and your silly ideas." Maybe I felt that way because, I was going to have to say a few more words up here than I normally do. And so I get to this point when I may be speaking for almost the first time, and I've already said a lot, and you're sick of hearing my voice. But maybe you can give your ear a short while longer. And because there's something that God has for you this morning from His Word. We believe that His Word speaks to us. It's living and active. The story was told of a student at Ohio State University who was taking his final calculus exam. And it was a huge class, 1,000 students. The final exam was taking place in the big lecture hall, being supervised by the professor, who was a bit of a gruff man. When the exams were being in session, he would love to just shout out how much time people had to finish their exam before they had to put down their pencil. And that made this student, very panicky, rushed, that he kept barking out the time remaining. And so he decided in this big hall of 1,000 people that he was going to take as much time as he needed to complete this exam. And so when it came time and the professor barked out that time is up, put your pencils down. Everybody did, except for him, and everybody submitted their exams and left the room, and he just kept working away until he's finished. And so it was another 5 minutes, and 5 minutes became 10 minutes, and 20 minutes and a half hour, and it was another hour when he finally finished the exam. The whole while the professor was up front just staring at him, waiting for him, kind of gloating in being able to fail this student to his face, kind of relishing that opportunity. And so when he finally finished, the student brought up the exam to the table with the professor, where there was a big stack of the other 999 exams there. And the professor said to him, "Well, how does it feel to know that you have failed this class and you're going to have to take it again next year?" And the student replied, "Do you know who I am?" And the professor kind of said, "No." So the student asked again, "Do you know who I am? Do you know what my name is?" "Who do you think you are?" "No, I don't." The student said, "I thought so." And he slipped his test into the middle of the pile and walked out of the room. There might be a point to that, maybe. When we come to this story, you probably heard this story a few times. I know I've preached on it before. I'm sure you remember that very well. But this is a very prolific story in the scriptures. One of the most important stories. And it's a story that has kind of an equal measure evoked either inspiration, confusion, or outright revulsion. And sometimes all three at once. And there's so many layers to these few verses here. There's such deep meaning here that we can't plumb the depth of that all this morning. But we want to take a look at the two main characters here in turn a little bit. Because this story really is about, we'll find, God revealing his character to Abraham. And how that influences the call on Abraham's life. The story begins here, chapter 22, verse 1. It says, "Sometime later, God tested Abraham." He designed a test. What was this test going to be? Well, God called to Abraham. Abraham said, "Here am I," and then God gave him a command. "Abraham, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go up to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain that I will show you." This is the test. "Abraham, offer up your son to me." Your only son, if you had forgotten, Abraham, your only son, just to heighten the tension here, to see what's on the line. Your only son. Can you imagine? And it wasn't a deed that could be done in a moment. It was a region at a distance. He had to travel 3 days with his son, holding his son's hand to get to that mountain. Right? So 3 agonizing, torturous days that he has to mull over this call of God. The question, though, is why the test? Why? Is it to see how obedient Abraham is? I wonder how much Abraham loves me. I wonder how strong Abraham's faith is. Is that why God gives the test? Would it be like me, and I didn't just bring this for comfort for myself. This is Annika's doll. This is Caroline. This is an expensive doll. About $120 US. It's an American Girl doll, which maybe some of you are kind of familiar with. It's a big thing in the States. And it was a tradition in Erica's family that when a girl turned 7, she got to pick an American Girl doll. Okay. So when Annika turned 7, her American grandparents got her this doll. Now she knew it was coming. There had been the promise. When you turn 7, because she had older cousins who had them, and she wanted one so bad. In fact, she has that cousin Greta, right, who was born prematurely. So she's younger than Annika, but she's actually older than Annika on the birth certificate, right? And she got one before Annika, and that drove her crazy. But finally, when Annika turned 7, she got to pick her own American Girl doll, and she picked Caroline. And Britta turned 7 in March, and so she's eagerly anticipating her 7th birthday because she knows Grandma and Grandpa are going to get her a doll. And in fact, in April, we're going to be in Minneapolis. We're going to go to the American Girl doll store, and she's going to get it directly from the shelf. Ooh, anyway, it's going to be a highlight. So she's been eagerly anticipating her 7th birthday so she can get her own doll. And now, it was promised. They had to wait a long time to get it. It's a very cherished possession of Annika's. Now, what if Daddy goes, I wonder how much my daughter loves me. Am I number 1 in her life? Does she love me more than she loves her Carolyn doll? I guess in this instance, I didn't give it to her. I would never spend $120 on a doll. Does she love me more than the doll? Hey, Annika, come here. Go and get your Carolyn doll. Okay. Now, Annika, I want you to go into your room, and I'm going to give you a knife, and I want you to tear apart your doll. I haven't done this. There's some looks here like, you monster! You monster! Right? But that's your reaction, isn't it? You cruel father. You know, you would do that as a test to see if she loves you more than she loves the doll. You're cruel. Right? And you wouldn't be wrong to feel that way. I mean, I would never do that, right? Because that would be cruel. Is that what's happening here? Because this is the problem a lot of people have with this story. Is this a cruel God who's just messing with Abraham, messing with a good man? Is this just God's sick way of seeing if God is really number 1 in Abraham's life? What is a test? A test is normally given to show the teacher what the student knows. It reveals to the teacher what the student already knows. Or it maybe reveals the character of the student to the teacher. I just want to suggest to you, if you understand that's what's happening here, I think you're going to have trouble with this story. I don't think that's what this test is. I don't think that's what God's tests are. God's test, this test, is not about the teacher seeking to discover what the servant knows, what the servant's character is. God's tests are to show you what he knows, to reveal to you the character of God. So the test then here is it's not about God discovering something, as if God didn't already know. And that's kind of the way it's framed here, but that's not what's happening. God already knows the character of Abraham. God already knows the content of his heart, the quality of his faith. He doesn't need to devise a test to discover that. It's not about God discovering. He already knows. This test is all about Abraham discovering what God knows. Abraham discovering God's character. And you find this throughout the story of Abraham, and I think this might be the last Sunday where we're going through the life of Abraham. It's been about 2 months. And we find throughout the life of Abraham, more than any other person's life in the Old Testament, this kind of bit-by-bit discovery of who God is. Because along the way in this story, between Genesis 12 and Genesis 22 here, the characters keep giving God new names. They discover something new about the character of God, and then they give God a new name to show that they are discovering more and more of who God is. And so that's because Abraham didn't know God. Abraham was a moon worshiper. He worshipped false idols. He didn't know on the one true God. He didn't call on the one true God. The one true God called on him. Just as to be a Christian, the one true God calls on us. We don't call on him. He calls on us. Okay? So he didn't have knowledge of God when the one true God came to him. God just comes and speaks and says, I am the Lord. And then a few chapters later in Genesis 16, you remember that story of Hagar, where Hagar has to flee because she's being abused. And out in the wilderness, God comes to Hagar, and Hagar gives God a name. Do you remember? El Roi, or El Rai, or however it's pronounced, which means the God who sees me. God cares about little old me. God cares. That's what that name means. This is not a God like the other gods who couldn't care less. You're just a bunch of ants. This is a God who cares about the abused servant girl. The Lord is El Rai. And so these new names keep coming. And we see a greater discovery of God. And that's what's happening here, because here God, in Genesis 21, Abraham gives God another name, El Elyon, the enduring God, the faithful God, the everlasting God. And here, Abraham gives God another name. All right, so this is about Abraham discovering God, not the other way around. The name that God gives to Abraham that Abraham gives to God is Jehovah Jireh. You've maybe heard that before. Jehovah Jireh, which means the Lord who provides. At the end of this test, he names the mountain, the Lord will provide. The Lord is the Lord who provides. Jehovah Jireh. Now, that was quite a discovery for Abraham. Because in those days, in the sort of context in which Abraham grew up, in all the cultures around Abraham there, a God asking you to sacrifice your child wasn't that bizarre of a request. We see this at other points in the Old Testament. Other false gods who demand your firstborn, to burn your firstborn in the fire, so that God will bless you with good crops, or more children, or health, or whatever it is. And so that was the prevailing worldview. That wasn't that bizarre of a thing that a God would ask you to sacrifice your child to show the depth of your devotion to that God. It was a way of showing that you valued that God more than you valued your own child. And so that was Abraham's day. And you know what? It still happens today. You'll see shrines, different religions maybe, where there's an idol and there's a plate of sweets or rice or milk. Or they give food to the idol. I don't know how they think that works, but there's some sense that it gets given to God, and then that unlocks some repayment from God in some form. So that happens in other cultures and other religions today. It happened in Mongolia, and I've told you the story before when I was there. Everywhere you go in Mongolia, there's rock piles. And if you're walking by a rock pile, you better stop and pick up a rock and add it to the pile and walk around in the right direction. I don't know which is the right direction. And say the right words to get the evil spirits off your back. Okay? You have to appease the powers somehow by giving something. And so they would give something of value. Money, cigarettes. And that's where I smoked my first cigarette. Stole it from the false gods of Mongolia. And that all strikes us as very primitive, doesn't it? And yet, is our society any different? Really, we've become more sophisticated, but the whole concept of the relationship between God and man, while more sophisticated, really is no different. And that's why if you ask somebody, the average person, okay, how do you get to heaven? How do you get heaven from God? How do you get good things from God? Well, live a good life. Do good deeds. Isn't it the same thing? I make a sacrifice of goodness, whatever that is, helping my neighbor or whatever, and God responds. So whether you think there's a real God out there that works that way, or whether you just use the word karma, right? People like, that's what karma is. You sow good things, you sacrifice good things, and those things return to you. It's the same old song and dance as in Abraham's life here. But you can understand that. That's how a master-servant relationship works, right? God's master, we're servant. That's how a master-servant relationship works. You give him something, and he'll give you something back. What God is doing here, I want to suggest to us, is that he is just turning that on his head. Their conception of God, our conception of God, he's just totally demolishing that and turning it on its head here. So, you know the story. You've just heard it. He gets to the top of the mountain. He lays his son on the altar, raises the knife, and God stops him. Stop. Don't do it. Don't do it. Turn to your left. There's a ram caught in the thicket. Take the ram that I've provided for you and offer it in place of your son. What a relief. And so God provides the ram in place of Isaac and shows Abraham that he is the one who provides. He's reorientating the conception of this relationship. God is the one who provides for us. We are not the ones who first of all provide for God. And it's about way more than a man and a son and a sheep, okay? Because this story God is pointing ahead to another story, the story, right? I think most of you are probably got some sense of that's a deeper level of what's happening here. God is laying the framework to understand the sacrifice of his son, his one and only son for us. And the similarities are striking. When you think of Isaac being laid upon the altar, when you think of Jesus, here Isaac is the only son. We hear that twice. The only son. Jesus is God's only son. Isaac carries the wood on his back, we're told. Right? The sticks are put on Isaac's back. He carries them up, and he's sent up the mountain, Mount Moriah. Now, we don't exactly know where that is, although historians think it is where the temple in Jerusalem was. It is Mount Zion. When they get to the top of that mountain, Isaac is placed on the wood. And that's where God intervenes. But you have Jesus, the only Son of God. For God so loved the world, he gave his only Son. Jesus, too, carries the wood on his back up the mountain. And it's the same mountain. I mean, God is writing one story here, right? His only Son carries the wood for the offering up the mountain, and he gets to the top of that mountain, and then he is placed upon the wood. Couldn't have been more clear. We could not give God what he required, so God provided. This is the essence of the gospel. We have no righteousness to offer God, but he provides the righteousness in his son Jesus. And so when the crowds ask Jesus, okay, you seem to know God the Father quite well. Tell us, what are the good works he requires? And Jesus responds, trust in the one he has sent. Trust in the one he has sent. In other words, know that God has provided and trust in the provision of God. That's what your Father is looking for. And so you have John say in John chapter 1, to all who received him, to all who received Jesus, who believed in his name, God gave the right to be called children of God. To all who received, who didn't work to get it, who didn't give it, but who received it, he gives the right to be called children of God. And so, in this story, God is trying to explode how we conceive of the relationship between us and him. And God is revealing his character to Abraham, that he is not the Lord who makes demands, he is the Lord who provides. This is the character of God. This is what Abraham kind of suspects. This is what he's seen, but this is confirmed on the mountain. And so he gives God the name Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. But let's move on here to talk about Abraham and the call, because we can't be mistaken that God does make demands. They're called commands, right? God commands. The Lord who provides commands. He commanded Abraham to take his son and go up on the mountain. Does that ring a bell to you? For those of you who have been here over the weeks, this is the command of God. Take your son and go to the place where I will show you. Does this ring a bell? There's a prize for whoever gets this. Abraham leaving home. I lied, there is no prize. But your reward is in heaven, Patty. Trust me. That's right. That's right. The very beginning, when God first comes to Abraham. Remember Genesis 12? God first comes and he says, go from the country, your people, your father's household, to the land I will show you. It's the same thing. Here, there's all these similarities. Abraham is called to go. He's called to leave the comfortable, the stable, the familiar, and go towards a new place. He's called to go to a place that the Lord hasn't revealed to him. He will only show him in time as he goes. He does not know the destination before he leaves. God only points him in the right direction. And in both instances, Abraham is called to offer up. To offer up, to leave something. In the first instance, leave your family, leave everything you know, your country, your customs, all of that, and follow me. And here, he's called to leave his family. He's called to offer up his son. Right? And there's a 35-year period here. This is 35 years after he first gets the call of God. But it's in essence the same call. Abraham's relationship with God began with the call, but the call keeps coming. It's not a one-time call with a one-time answer. The call keeps coming. The call of God is not only how you get into God's presence, the call of God is how you grow in God's presence. The call is what makes you a Christian, but the call is also what grows you as a Christian. And it's interesting, to this point, God's call that has come to Abram, like that first call 35 years earlier, it asked Abraham to leave. He did ask Abraham to leave his family, to leave what he knows. But what came with it? What helped Abraham to go? There's another prize for whoever knows this. You're on to me, aren't you? Right? There's a promise that goes with it, right? Leave your family. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will give you an offspring. I will bless the world through you. There's the call to leave and go and to venture out into the unknown, but that call comes with this incredible blessing. In fact, God offers to give Abraham what he's always wanted, but has been unable to get himself. He wants offspring. He can't do it. God offers to give it to him, but he's got to go. So that's like the first call when we follow Christ, right? We get to this point where we're poor in spirit. We can't get the joy, the satisfaction, whatever it is we want. We cannot find it ourselves. God offers it to us. He calls us to leave, to follow him, and he gives us these great promises and these blessings. And we see that, and so we leave the country where we're from, and we follow him because we have the promise of the blessing. That was that first call, but notice what's changed here. There's the call to leave and go, but what's missing? There's no promise. There's no, go do this and lay down your son, and I will, blah, 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 blah. No, it's just a command. It's just a call to offer up without the promise of anything better in return. God's call had also included a promise of something better he would receive. Here the call comes with no promise, no reward to gain. To his mind, just something to lose, which is his only son, right? The thing that he cherishes most. And I think we'll see that's the point. Because God reminds him, your only son. Chapter before, Ishmael has left. There was another son, Ishmael, but he's out of the picture. He's gone. It's just one son now. Right? He is the object of all of Abraham's hope. Resides on the shoulders of this one boy. Right? And so God reminds him what's at stake here. Your only son. And you can imagine you can imagine what Isaac meant to him, right? You can imagine, especially in his culture. Isaac was everything. Isaac was his joy. Isaac was his hope. Isaac was his future. Isaac was his security. He was the son of God's promise. And in this story, Isaac represents that which is dearest to Abraham's heart. That's what he represents. That which is dearest to his heart. So this is the test, okay? Is Abraham's hope in Isaac, or is Abraham's hope in God? Is Abraham's hope in the promise, or is Abraham's hope in the promiser? Is Abraham's security in Isaac, or is Abraham's security in God? This is the test. Is he willing to obey God totally, to have unswerving trust in God, even though he doesn't know in any human way how to put together this command of God and the promise of God of offspring through him? He has no way of putting those two, harmonizing those two things. Is he willing to obey God totally, to have unswerving trust in God? So bringing this to us here, after you've been a Christian a little while, some of you have been a Christian a long while, some of you have been a Christian a little while, but at some point after you first responded to the call of God, and there was this great promise, the great gift you received by leaving and going where he showed you, after you've been a Christian a little while, you realize something, that maybe when you first heard and responded to the call, you gave your life to Christ, you granted yourself to God in general. You gave yourself to God, generally speaking, without really working through the specifics. You came to realize that functionally your heart hadn't changed too much. That there's still something in your heart or something that your heart grips onto as something that you really need. And without it, there isn't joy. And without it, there isn't hope and there isn't security. You need that thing. You might discover that in time, as you follow the call, that you find that thing in your heart. That thing that without it, there's no hope. Jesus kind of talks about coming into our life like somebody coming into a house. Remember Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and be with them and they with me. Right? So we use this language. You know, Jesus is knocking at the door of your heart. Will you let him in? Will you invite him in? And so we say yes. To hear and answer the call of God is, yes, Lord, come in. Reign in this house. Be Lord of this house. And we give him a key. Key to the house. And there he sits in the living room. And you commune with Jesus. And you sup with Jesus. And it's nice. But then Jesus starts to wander around his house. And he starts using his key, right? And trying doors. And he comes to a door, or maybe doors that he discovers are locked. You know, the front door was open. But there's some room there that key doesn't work in that door. He has not been granted access to that place. Right? Because in there is that thing that our heart believes that without it, we cannot have, there is no hope, there is no security. We need that thing, and so that door is locked, because that thing must stay. I cannot give control over that thing. And so the key works in every door but that door. And Jesus says, what gives? I thought this key is supposed to work in every door. We say, God, what's in there has to stay. I don't trust you in that room. I don't trust you. I don't trust what, if you go in that room, I don't trust what you're going to do. Because I lose control in that space. There. And I can't lose control because in there is the thing that I need. Jesus found that with the rich young ruler, right? The guy who wanted to follow him. I'll follow you. What do I need to do? I'll do this. Well, yeah, I'm doing that. What else do I need to do? Well, okay, I'm doing that too. Great. Okay. Sell everything you have and give it to the poor. Oh. What's that, Mom? Yeah, Mom's calling. Come in. He found the door that was locked. God knows how to find those doors. So, is there a locked door in your heart? This was the test here. He was showing Abraham that God can be trusted in the most sensitive of rooms. God will provide. You don't need to lock any door. Is there a door locked in your heart? Jesus has free reign other places. You know, some people, when they think about becoming a Christian, they might ask, if I become a Christian, will I have to do this? Will I have to do that? Will I have to give up this or that? What's a working definition of God? God is the non-negotiable in your life. Right? That's what God is. God is the non-negotiable. The thing that has to stay. The thing that everything else ultimately has to give way to. And so that question, if I become a Christian, if I obey, if I follow this, will I have to give up this or that? It's like saying, as long as I'll follow God as long as He helps me get to my real God. That thing that's non-negotiable. That thing where your heart finds its rest. Unless you're willing to say to the God of Abraham, whatever your will is, I will do it unconditionally, then you're not coming to Him as God. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the one who gave his first name to my firstborn son, who doesn't exist in case you're wondering. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said like this: when Christ calls a man, He bids him come and die. When Christ calls a man, He bids him come and die. And what that means is He's asking for a master key that gets to every single room. He's asking to be that non-negotiable, that place ultimately where your heart finds its rest. And sometimes the God who is trying to save you feels like He's trying to kill you. I'm sure that's what Abraham felt like. Right? The God who's trying to save you feels like he's trying to kill you, like a shepherd who has a big vat of antiseptic to guard his sheep against disease, and I guess this is what happens. They just dunk the sheep and have to hold the sheep under, in there for a certain length of time. And that sheep thinks, why is my shepherd trying to kill me? As he's gasping for air. Sometimes it feels like that way when God is trying to save you, to cause you to unlock the door so He can be the non-negotiable. So Abraham has to journey 3 days, agonizing 3 days, and maybe because that the time is needed. The time for him to think about this is necessary. These 3 days, this time he has to wrestle with this. It transforms his response from a reaction to a decision. Abraham has to arrive at the point of conscious commitment, where he chooses to give the key, to unlock the door to Isaac. All my hopes are in Isaac. That's where it all rests. But does it? Does it? And ultimately he says, no, my hope rests in you. So I will offer up Isaac to you. Notice, did he really believe that God was going to kill Isaac? Did he believe that? Because he says he'll be back. Yeah, but is he lying? Abraham says, to the servants, we're going to come back. We're just going to go do our thing. We're going to come back. And Isaac says, Dad, where's the lamb? I thought there's supposed to be a lamb in these sort of situations. The Lord will provide a lamb, my son. Don't worry. Is he doing what parents sometimes do? Is he lying? Or does he actually believe that they're going to come back? I think he does. I think you're right, Patty. I think he believes. And certainly the author of the book of Hebrews thought that. Listen to what he says. We're wrapping this short sermon up. This is what the author of Hebrews says when he talks about the faith of Abraham. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. What the author of Hebrews is saying, what's going through Abraham's mind is, even if God doesn't stop my hand and that knife goes into my son, even if God will raise him from the dead. Because God has promised. Wow. What Abraham is saying is, I don't know how God will, but God will do it. If I let God into that room, I don't know what he's going to do with that stuff in there. But God provide. I can't see the way forward, but God does. And you'll notice that God never said, kill him. Kill your son. He just said, offer him up. Lay him on the altar. Give him to me. It's God's way of asking Abraham, will you trust me with Isaac? Will you let me have total control? Total control. Or will this door be locked? So Abraham unlocked the door, and he learned something that was life-altering, really in history-altering, that the Lord is the Lord who provides. God's whole purpose in this story is to show Abraham that he will provide when Abraham lays down that which is dearest to him. And this is the point of the story for us. God will provide when we lay down, when we offer up that thing which is dearest to us. That thing that we have felt like, I need that because I can't be happy without that. I can't be happy without this relationship. I have my dream for my marriage, and I can't be happy if it doesn't look like this. Whatever it might be. God gave Isaac back. So as we wrap it up here, Isaac was good. The stuff in that room, it wasn't bad stuff. It was good stuff. Stuff God had given. But God just wants to know, do I have total sway over that? Are you trusting in that, clinging to that, or are you clinging to me and willing to offer up even that? And when Abraham offers it up, God gives it back. Right? but Isaac comes back to him differently, right? He holds Isaac differently. He doesn't have to protect Isaac the way he did before, because the Lord is the Lord who will provide. So God's offer to call up, God's call to offer up is an act of love this morning. This wasn't an act of cruelty. This was an act of love, because now Abraham knows that God will provide. If my hope is found in God, then I'm unshakable, right? This was a supreme act of love, because any other security anywhere else is false security. There is no true security without God as our ultimate hope. When we cling to God, when God is our non-negotiable. So to be a Christian is to continually rehear and grasp God's call of offering up that which is dearest to us. Offering it up to God. We are to withhold nothing from God's control, but offer it all up, unlock every door, precisely because God did not withhold his Son, but gave him up for us. He who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also graciously give us all things? Right? That's God's way of saying, unlock every door, people. Trust God in everything. Find your rest in him, not in any other anything else, even if it's a good thing. So the question, that this text leaves us with is, what is your Isaac? In your life, what's your Isaac? That thing or that person or that idea or that dream that if you can't have it, there isn't hope, there isn't joy, there isn't security. The thing that you must have to have those things. What is your Isaac, that thing which is dearest to your heart? God commands us to offer up Isaac. Do you have a locked door? Think about this. God gave Abraham 3 days to think about it. Take time. Don't leave and not think about it. Do you have a locked door there? A place where you feel you need to maintain control. Because you're finding ultimately your hope and your rest in that thing. The call of God this morning is to go to the place I will show you. Though you know not where you go. Go. And I will provide. Lay it on the altar. Offer it up to God by, maybe praying a prayer, and I'll close with this prayer. It's a prayer that A.W. Tozer concludes a chapter in his book, The Pursuit of God. The chapter is titled The Blessedness of Possessing Nothing, and he concludes the chapter with this prayer. Do you want to stand and I'll read this prayer, and maybe in your heart you can pray this prayer. We can pray it together. And then we'll close our time here by with one last song. Father, I want to know thee, but my cowardly heart fears to give up its toys. I cannot part with them without inward bleeding, and I do not try to hide from thee the terror of the parting. I come trembling, but I do come. Please root from my heart all those things which I have cherished so long and which have become a very part of my living self, so that thou mayest enter and dwell there without a rival. Then shalt thou make the place of thy feet glorious. Then shall my heart have no need of the sun to shine in it, for thyself wilt be the light of it, and there shall be no night there. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's sing.